Okay, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. I appreciate your patience while we let some folks come in. Appreciate those that are able to join and take the time to talk about some of the legislative recaps and updates from Florida's most recent 2023 legislative session. So excited to take the opportunity to have this conversation. I designed this presentation where I don't plan to talk the whole time. I'd like to hopefully open it up and have just a Q&A back and forth at the end to discuss some of the things I'll bring up throughout the session. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I see that there's a number of Southfacers on here, so I'll apologize a little bit in advance that I've got a few slides that introduce Southface to our audience. So you'll get to see some of my elevator pitch as well as learn a little bit more about the organization in which you work. So appreciate you all being here, and let's get started. So we're going to talk about the Florida legislature today. We're going to talk about just a selection of bills that our advocacy team had been tracking and following during this most recent legislative session. We're going to talk about the way that those bills relate to some of our advocacy work, both at Southface Sarasota and some of our other programs, and also the ramifications it has in general on energy transitions in Florida and in the U.S. South. So to start with, I'm Will Collier. I'm the Interim Director of Advocacy for the Southface Advocacy Program. Previously, I was the project manager over the Georgia project portfolio. And so super excited to have the opportunity to engage in the Florida work more explicitly and more directly. Our advocacy team consists of myself and Allison Laura, who's our Florida team member. I'm filling in for Allison, who's on leave at the moment. We also have Artis Trice and Ernest Rogers, who are program coordinators in our program. So the four of us collectively work across both Georgia and Florida on legislative, regulatory, public and private partnership advocacy issues that we'll discuss some today. So I'm excited to pick up with some of the work that Allison's been developing via the legislature and have a discussion with you all about some of the state of the bills that have just gone through, some that were stopped, and then also how we think about a strategy for the next legislative session. One of the things we're doing in our advocacy program right now that we're really excited about is thinking strategically, not just about how we prepare for the next legislative session, but how we develop a strategic plan for those coming over the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years to develop a holistic approach to our legislative work. So excited to discuss that with you all today. We work across the legislative regulatory space. We work on educational initiatives, outreach initiatives, developing coalitions and coalition partners on projects to really make the work we do across our technical services teams and our other programs be a part of communities and have as much impact as possible. We've done so recently in the regulatory space in Georgia through their integrated resource plan and their rate case. We've done work intervening in codes proceedings, and we of course do work both in the Georgia and Florida legislature. In Florida, we've also commented recently on the Florida Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act, and we have a Southface Sarasota Peel podcast episode about our work in FECA. So if you'd like to follow up on some of our other work that we've done in Sarasota, please just go to the Southface Sarasota website and look for the Peel podcast and check out some of the things that we've done previously. Okay, moving right along here. Yeah, this is a controversial slide, I guess, because I produce these images with generative AI, which I know is, has pros and cons to it. But these are some of the key themes in our advocacy program that we're thinking about over the coming this year and the years to come. And that is energy justice and energy freedom associated with this concept, energy burden, and how much of your energy and your utility bills, what percentage of that is your income and how that affects especially low and moderate income households. Linked to that of course is options for affordable housing, and also affordable housing that's sustainable and healthy. Those things are not mutually exclusive, and that's something we focus on a lot at Southface. And then again, as we talked about previously, being really local, hyper local, and tailoring our work to local initiatives and local resilience is always a focus of our work. Okay. With that, you've heard my Southface spiel, so I appreciate you listening there for a few minutes. Now let's get into a synopsis of some of a selection of Florida legislature that we kind of tracked this year. I'm really interested to get everybody's feedback about it, have a little open discussion. I'm only going to talk about it for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, introduce a few ideas. And then I'd really like to get folks' thoughts about other things you've been following in the legislature. Certainly there's tons of bills out there that mutate and combine and make their ways through the legislature in a lot of different ways. Certainly we're only covering a tiny piece of that universe here, but we're really interested in starting these conversations so we can develop our work holistically, both with partners and looking forward into coming legislative sessions. So appreciate that discussion piece and the opportunity to work with you all more. Okay, so let's use this little scorecard as a simple roadmap here. We looked at just a selection of bills, and Allison was tracking in this last legislative season a selection of bills really focused around clean energy, sustainability, and green buildings. And so these are the ones that I just want to highlight for you quickly today. You look at it just really quickly and you're like, okay, man, we got 5.5 wins and 1.5 losses. That's not too bad. But just in the past week, we've had a change there, and we've shifted one of the most important wins into the loss column. And that has serious ramifications, both for the work we do at Southface and the work that we want to do with our partners in Florida. So I want to especially spend some time talking about the recent veto of the IRA and IIJA funds from the office of the governor. So we'll get there, but first we'll hit some wins along the way. Okay. First win is SB 284, EV fleet procurement. So this is basically a bill that updated an existing rule that was established during the Charlie Crist administration era. And it was basically that previously a climate-friendly fleet vehicle was defined exclusively by fuel efficiency. And so at the time that was a disadvantage for early EV adoption. And so this bill updates that to look at the total cost of ownership over the life of the vehicles. And that creates a much more compelling cost argument for switching to EV fleets in municipalities and counties. And so this is a big win to allow the opportunity for widespread EV and fleet adoption across the state of Florida, again, in different cities, municipalities, and the like. And implementation will begin next year. One thing I just want to mention very briefly about all the slides you'll see here is I've tried to put them together in a way that you can walk away with some resources. So on each slide, you'll see some information about the history of the bill that came from the Florida Legislature website, as well as the hyperlinks to go directly to those pages. So you'll find hyperlinks in this presentation that will lead you both directly to the legislature and the legislative documents, but also to popular press articles as well. And happy to follow up with you. Okay, so that's a win. EV fleets on the way. Another one, and you can see here, we have some that we're excited that passed, and other bills we're excited that were stopped. And so both in our nonprofit advocate world of the coalition partners we work with, we both played defense and offense on different legislative and regulatory policies. And so the previous bill was offense, if you will, and this is a defensive stop related to preemption bills. This is a large focus of our work recently in the Georgia legislature as well. It's something that will be a key theme of Southface's work moving forward across both states, because this is an issue that's going to continue to creep up in a variety of different permutations in the years to come. And that is, preemption bills quite simply are the state legislature preempting a local government's ability to make an energy code, a building code, a zoning code go above the state minimum. And so local governments have the ability to set their own rules, ordinances, and regulations that could exceed those baseline minimums. But the state legislature can also preempt their ability to do so by setting up these preemption bills that don't allow local governments to have those opportunities. That can, as some of these popular press articles I linked you to suggest, can really put a freeze and a chilling effect on sustainable development, sustainable building design, and the way that affordable housing can be rolled out and advanced in different municipalities and counties across both Florida and Georgia. We've also seen in Georgia preemption bills become a vehicle that, from what we and our coalition partners believe, are vehicles through which build to rent properties will become more and more in fashion, and will have more and more backing by investment interests who are interested in housing that would further create renter societies in the United States. So our advocacy program, we're especially interested in some of the links between affordable housing preemption bills and renters. Like many preemption bills, this one in Florida, and we saw very similarly with one of the big preemption bills in Georgia, I can't recall off the top of my head the number, it becomes what some people refer to as a potluck bill or a Christmas tree bill, or I called it a gumbo bill, where it's just like everything is thrown in together. And once these sort of individual bills start dying or don't have enough traction throughout the legislative process, they get tacked on in different negotiations and, conversations and deals in the corridors, where we end up with a bill like this that has a lot of different sort of items that aren't necessarily related, other than the fact that they deal with local government control and power. And so that's what we saw with this bill. It was stopped. Clio Institute, EDF, and other advocates, those of you on the call that were involved, we really appreciate your work there. And we expect bills like this to come back in the future. Another bill that was stopped that we really appreciate the work of our coalition partners was on reducing regulations around renewable natural gas, hydrogen, and the pipelines associated with those fuels. And so some advocate analyses that were published over the course of the legislative session basically suggested, as I understand it, that this SB 1162 would really take away some guardrails in the regulatory process in terms of how renewable gas recovery would occur, renewable natural gas recovery would occur, how some of the infrastructure can be developed, and some of the rules around that. And so there was pushback by a number of different advocate groups for a variety of reasons, some promoting more of a cost-based argument against this bill, and others more from just an environmental angle of the merits of RNG strategies in general. So this bill was stopped, and at least from my understanding of it, it will, of course, allow RNG recovery to continue, but in ways that have much more regulatory oversight and guardrails in place. Here's where we get into some of the partial wins. So this wasn't exactly a win, as I understand it, but sort of in a roundabout way. So one of the things I've talked about with Allison a few times that is a really interesting thing you see in Florida is this idea of schools as shelters during extreme weather events, especially hurricanes and floods, et cetera. And so HB 195 was to remove some cost barriers associated with putting solar on these shelter places, basically creating sort of school-based resiliency hubs that are extreme weather event focused. So the partial win here was this bill passed several committees in the House before it made it to the Senate. It died in the Senate, but in part because those costs were removed through another higher education bill. So basically HB 195 became moot because the costs associated with the cost exempt through HB 195 were incorporated through this other bill. So that's a partial win, and perhaps it'll come back in the future. Okay, couple more real quickly, and then we'll get to the juicy part. EV registration fee. This one died, but it's considered just a partial win or a partial loss because it's going to come back. The advocate partners that we work closely with in our coalition suggest that this will be one we'll see again. A lot of advocates were really upset with the way this bill progressed through the legislature, as it didn't see a lot of the things that a lot of electrification or clean energy advocates want to see. Which is some of the the funds from these policy instruments being invested back in charging infrastructure and electrification itself. So there were studies that supported earmarks to this that were not incorporated. It died, and I think this will be a large focus of the advocacy coalition next year as it comes back. Let's see, I've got this one, and then we move to the IIJA and IRA. So the final bill to talk about before we get to the recent budget stuff is this GRU takeover bill. And again, when I say final, this is the final of a very small list of bills that we were tracking to inform our work. But obviously there is a massive constellation of bills that informs our work that falls outside of this. And that we would love to hear more about your organizations, those on the call who might be tracking some of these other bills and how we can partner to do that work. So finally, the GRU takeover bill, HB 1645, was basically a bill to remove authority and power from the city council, the city of Gainesville, to appoint the Gainesville Regional Utility Board, and it places that power into the hands of the governor. And so now the governor, with the passage of this bill, will appoint the board members for Gainesville Regional Utilities, which has the second highest rates of any utility in the state of Florida. And so finally, that brings us to what was a win as the legislative session closed. And I know advocates in the energy space and in the sustainability world in Florida, as well as Georgia, and of course across the Southeast and the nation, are really excited to see the ways that states start to go after and incorporate these newly available federal funding opportunities into their budgets and into their allocation processes. And so there was some excitement around IRA and IIJA coming through the Florida legislature. For those who are unfamiliar, IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act passed under the Biden administration. IIJA is the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. The first I will come to me, or someone can shout it out. So we can see here on the veto list on the right, I think this is from page 3 of the 9-page veto list that Governor DeSantis signed. We can see boxes 1463A and B are the 2 line items in the budget associated with IIJA funds and IRA funds. Specifically, that B line, the second line, is the $5 million of initial funding that would go to set up the homes and HERO programs under the Inflation Reduction Act. So when DeSantis signed the budget last week on the, I think it was the 15th or something, I believe. Yep. He vetoed those 2 line items from the bill, and in doing so triggered the complete cancellation of any additional funds totaling $346 million from those federal funding block grants. There is chatter that I've read in popular press that he did or did not know this, depending on his political aspirations and how that might be used in other campaigns. I won't try to speak to the reasons that the DeSantis administration may or may not have vetoed these line items, but it has significant ramifications for the work that we do both at Southface and throughout our partner coalitions in Florida. And just as a new observer to this space, in the short time I've started to engage in some of these conversations, I can certainly see that some of these recent political actions have a chilling effect on some of the ways that our coalition partners are thinking about how to go about this work. And so an interesting yet complicated and important wrinkle that we have to consider in our work. So there's a lot of popular press that's coming out about of course, the different motivations or reasons DeSantis has vetoed some of these line items, but also some of the ramifications of that moving forward. Of course, this one was disappointing because the budget had been authorized and secured for that amount of money to begin those block grant programs. They were vetoed. And this is money that is doesn't affect the Florida budget in any way. It's money from the federal government to provide Florida residents with rebates for energy efficient appliances. So this is, you could really think about it as their federal tax dollars returning to them in the form of investments in clean energy transitions. And now those Floridian federal tax dollars will be used to subsidize residents in other states who will have the opportunity to collect those rebates for energy efficiency appliances and the like. So an interesting development, makes the work around energy efficiency and weatherization in Florida that much more difficult and that much more important. So with that, I'll stop there. I appreciate your time and your attention. I know that was just a quick run through of, you know, a half dozen or so pieces of legislation that affect some of the work we do. Would love to hear about other bills, other pieces of legislation that those in the audience have tracked. And then just talk more. You have my contact information here. I want to say thanks to the different units at Southface that were involved in putting together this presentation. And then also our funders at the Energy Foundation, our coalition partners that we work with. So appreciate everyone's time and your attention. And it looks like we can give you a few minutes back, unless there's any further questions.